discount bins, and I was a primary beneficiary. He introduced me to artists who became central to my life's soundtrack for the better part of a decade. Artists like John Hartford and Willie P. Bennett and Canned Heat and the Flying Burrito Brothers. And during the pandemic, we didn't see each other as much, and I moved away from country rock to jazz, and I was surprised to learn independently that Ray had moved on to jazz himself, except the route he went through was via the Grateful Dead. Now, I have a confession. In a room filled with deadheads, or that soon will be filled with deadheads, to launch a book on the Grateful Dead, I stand before you as an unrepentant unbeliever. I tried listening to Dark Star. I did.
Which one?
It was the wrong one, man.
Perhaps it may have been the wrong version. Perhaps I didn't have enough weed, but I just didn't get it. But the last time I saw Ray, he brought me a copy of the Grateful Dead's June 10th, 1973 show, for which he wrote the liner notes, and about which you can read in the book tonight, and you probably will hear a bit about as well. And there was a moment or two on disc 2, just a moment, listening to the interplay of Garcia and Weir's guitars as they sang to each other, that I caught a sense of something special. For a moment, a crystalline moment of excitement, I understood. But then the kids banged through the living room and I had to leave on some errand and that moment passed. But I think it does mean there's some hope for me. Or you're fucked. I don't think anybody writes as well about music as Ray Robertson. Whether it be in novels like Moody Food or his most recent Estates Large and Small, where the Dead's music might well be given a full character credit. Or his books of music and cultural criticisms like Lies of the Poets with Guitars. Ray's been writing about music in a way few can, passing on enthusiasm as much as he does the stories of the artists, making you both hear the music and want to go listen to it. The same, even for an unbeliever like me, is true for all the years combined. A personal tour through 50 years of shows, of which the less said by me up here, the better. So I'll leave it to Ray and Chris to hash out. So from Chatham and Toronto, Ray Robertson.
Thank you, Danny.
And Ray was also joined by longtime Toronto singer-songwriter Chris Staig, an artist the Sun is called a songwriting Charles Atlas, and CBC is called a working musician in the truest sense, and a great songwriter. He's released at least 5 albums, including his most recent joint project with Jonathan Billings called Years Gone By. So please welcome Chris.
And just so you know, we're not nervous because we can't see you because all the dry ice.
This is pretty far out.
It's pretty good. It's like taking my glasses off.
At winter, it's going pretty good, right? Did the Dead ever employ dry ice at Winterland? Is that in the book?
Bob was wearing his tight shorts. We're not going to talk about that tonight.
No, we're not. So, new book.
New book.
All the years combined, Grateful Dead in 50 shows. I wanted to start by first saying this is a brave book. This is a brave, yeah. And it reminds me of there's this band called the Beatles. Is everybody familiar with the band the Beatles?
They were before Wings, right?
Yeah, that's right. And Bob Weir went to see the Beatles in San Francisco, and that's when he got on the bus later that day. That's the night he met.
See, now I gotta erase it.
So anyhow, in the late 80s, there was a book called The Beatles Recording Sessions by Mark Lewison, and in the early 90s, there was a book called Revolution in the Head by Ian MacDonald. And they inspired a lot of critical reevaluation and excitement about the Beatles, particularly the Ian MacDonald book. And a lot of people didn't always agree with what he had to write, but he went song by song, and his passion for the topic was so great it sent you back to the music. And I'm so glad someone's finally done the same thing for the Grateful Dead. And you're the man who did it.
It's really cool. We were, in all full disclosure, we were talking a few days ago about what we're going to talk about, and you brought that up, and I hadn't really thought about that. I mean, I was doing a podcast a few weeks ago, and I told you that I was talking to somebody, and the guy was sort of breaking my chops for now. He'd been to so many shows, and I said, in 30 years, no one will be alive who ever saw the Grateful Dead. You can't say, yeah, but I saw it in Hartford, 83. No, it'd be like Billie Holiday, Jimmy Rogers, it doesn't matter. No, all we'll have is the music. So when you said that, because you lent me that McDonald book and I loved it, because it was kind of controversial, not kind of, spicy. And I thought, yeah, maybe this is the beginning, not me being the beginning, but this is how it starts in the sense that all we will have is the music, and it'll be almost like this Talmudic thing where we, redo the songs, look at the songs, and go through, and yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, I know it's true. I just said it, baby.
So I want to read you a quote from your last book.
Oh, cool.
Estates, Large and Small.
Yeah, set it to intersteer partially.
Just a shout out to the intersteer and Ava, she's here tonight. Staig and Billings at the intersteer. Come on by. Anyhow, I was reading the book and I said to my partner Elizabeth, I said, I think this is Ava in this book. She said, no, it's not. And then I read it and she said, yep, that's Ava. Anyhow, towards the end of the book, this is just a lovely, one of the main protagonists talking about a certain version of Stella Blue. And after the Dead came back from the US after doing a few shows in Egypt in the fall of '78, they sounded better than they had in a long time, refreshed, rejuvenated. Those 5 shows they did at the Winterland in October of '78 were crackling with energy, just crackling. And there's a special hot Stella Blue from the second last night that contains one of those Grateful Dead moments, the ones you wait for and hope, and they don't always materialize, at least not every night. At one point during Jerry's solo, it sounds like his soul is crying, like his fucking soul is crying. It's just wailing, and it's crying for all of us, for everybody listening, even if none of us, including Jerry, have a clue why it's all so terribly sad and yet so incredibly fucking beautiful. So when I read that, I thought, I think Ray started listening to the Grateful Dead.
He's gone over to the other side.
And so what I wanted to ask you next was, when you were first getting interested in you told me that you first listened to Jerry and Merle Saunders and a little bit of the Jerry Garcia band. Was anyone there to say to caution you that it might lead to harder stuff?
I actually put a warning on the record. This may lead to deadheadness.
Deadheadness?
No, it was all in my little bubble. But yeah, it did start with the stuff that I was more familiar with, songs, the beginnings, Bill and Ed's, and great songs too, because Garcia and Hunter, of course, come from that great folk tradition, and Jerry's in the bluegrass. So that was sort of my gateway. I mean, it was the sense that, okay, this isn't too weird, American Beauty, Working Man's Dead, I've heard them my whole life, who hasn't? And so it kind of, but then I said, drum solos, Jesus, 20-minute guitar solos, And I think it was one of those moments in your life where you do change a bit. I think I developed the ears to hear it, and I listened to a solo that Garcia played on the last song on that 2-record set for a song, It's Like a Road, and he played a guitar solo. And guitar solos for me, where I came from, Chatham, so Detroit radio, guitar solos were always the thing that you put in to kind of get it over with, get back to the song. And I kind of said, oh, is this what jazz people talk about? Like, I'm not anxious to get back to the words. I actually want to linger here. What do you mean it's over? It's only been 15 minutes. Oh, I don't recognize myself anymore. And that, of course, led to moving off to the Dead, because if you really want to hear Garcia, that improvisational thing, which is the real thing that I love, you do need to be with the bigger band. And that's how it was the Dead. It was Jack Garcia's guitar, though. That was really the thing. And when I got lost, if I said, geez, this band has no bottom, there's no, what's the bass player doing? He won't do his job. I would just follow Garcia's guitar, but then that allowed me to hang around and hear Lesh is very unorthodox at bass playing, or listen to his little weird things, or notice Keith. But so Garcia's guitar was always the connective tissue, so to speak. Yeah.
Do you guys agree with that? Most of you. Round of applause for Jerry. So, following Estates, Large and Small, is that when you started writing liner notes for the Dead, when you ended up working for the Dead organization?
No, that was completely, very, very much like a Dead story. Very much like a Dead story. I was probably 3/4 of the way through the first draft. Yeah. Of course, a first draft is the draft I give to Danny. He tells me it's not good enough, so that's that draft. But I was definitely working on it. I knew he liked the idea, because I sent him an email. I said, Danny, through no fault of my own, I might have written a book that won't lose you money. And he said, tell me more. So I was writing that when Dave Lemieux read, who's the Grateful Dead's legacy manager and a Canadian, he read Estates Large and Small and sent me an email to my website, and we talked, and we kind of got along a little bit, and one day he sort of said, "What's your favorite era of the Dead?" And I said, "Anything with the God Chase." 71, he said, "Oh, okay." And then a little bit later he said, "Do you want to do the liner notes to Day 645, which is 2 complete shows for 77? And that went really well, and that was great because I said, "This is amazing because you're allowed to put a little biographical note," I was going to say, and in this fall he will be publishing a book. So wow, heaven made, you know. Yeah. Multinationals are evil unless you work for them, and they're great. They're fantastic. And then about 3 months later, they must have liked it because every year there's a new box set. So 2023 it was a 17 CD box set of 5 shows in the summer of 73, which really is my sweet spot, 73, 74. And he said, "Do you want to write 10,000 words for that?" And I was thrilled. What about each show? So yeah, and that was completely coincidental. It just said, now it's been very advantageous, and I'm trying to promote this book because people have heard of me through the Dead, right? They haven't heard of me. "Oh, I read your novel from 2000." No, it's like I saw your stuff in the Dead. So it was just kind of those perfect storms where it happened, and it's been really cool because we've been doing events for this, and I'm seeing beyond the literary world. It's like other people, and it's kind of encouraging because you think nobody reads. You know, you could do a reading. There's like 8 people there, and well, I can't, you know. And he goes, "No, it's just people aren't. I don't know, whatever." The point is that there are people who want to read music, you know, good music, right, and stuff. It's been kind of fun to sort of break out of that little mold a little bit. I'll be back in that ghetto next year, but for now, I'm liberated and loving it.
Well, on late Sunday night, I heard you interviewed on the Grateful Dead channel. Well, I was in the hospital. No,
not you. You were in the waiting room.
I was in the waiting room. And it was wild to hear David Gans speaking to somebody I talk to all the time. And
Jerry, man.
Yeah, and he goes, "Well, this is compelling and some provocative shit."
Which I want in my next book.
That's right.
Compelling and provocative shit. David Gans. Yeah.
David Gans.
No, they really got it. I was a little bit worried because there are a lot of professional Grateful Dead people, and it's in their best interest, especially the ones who work for Warner Brothers. It's like it's all good and everything's wonderful and buy everything. And that's I was kind of wondering how that would work with these guys. And they sort of said, "Well, I read the book, and the first 2 pages I disagree with 3 things, but boy, this is a lot of fun, and we're talking about it." And I talked to them, I learned things, and I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." And I think that's really what I was so pleased was that they kind of got the idea. This isn't a fiat from above. It's like a conversation, and I think there's a real lack of that in our culture. It's very binary, and I love the fact that you can be uncomfortable and say, "Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Okay, yeah." I mean, that's what we want. We want to grow and have fun and expand and stuff. You don't get that from you probably lose some readers, but I think you gain some readers by honestly just sort of do your thing.
Here's a short quote from Donna Jean Dodger. She said about the songs, they asked about Robert Hunter's lyrics, and she said, "Well, it belongs to you, honey."
In that southern voice.
It belongs to you, honey.
Yeah, I love that.
And it belongs, and this is the thing that we're kind of dancing around a bit, and I'd like to get a little deeper into, is there is this tension with the Grateful Dead's music and the experience between the communal and the very personal.
Right.
And Robert's lyrics are a lot like that because you plant ice, you're going to harvest wind.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what that means, but I know exactly. What
It's
that
because
means.
Jerry sings it and the melody, it's like, there's some of my favorite Hunter songs make no sense on paper because they're not poetry, they're lyrics. But Jerry transformed. Jerry's famous, as we talk about this.
Yeah.
Hunter would give him a song and say, "Oh, I can use this hunk, but not that hunk." And Hunter's like, "Oh no, it doesn't resolve itself." He's like, "No, these will sound good as I sing them." Which is really what music's about. It's not about poetry play. Poetry stands on its own. It's got its own music. And I love the way that Hunter and Jerry takes these things and he makes them, like I'm singing these words that have no meaning and they're the most meaningful words I know. Which is the power of music, why music is the best, why music is as close to magic as we have.
Well, and I think that tension between the two things, like your personal experience listening to the song,
Right.
but there's a lot of people in the room tonight who've also had the communal experience of being in an arena or a stadium with the Grateful Dead or with a later incarnation.
Right.
Experiencing that together, and I think what we're seeing as the years go on and combine, that tension at the personal versus the communal is more in play. Because as you say, in 30 years, well, I hope to be here in 30 years. But there won't be a lot of people talking about that.
More or less.
I do believe, you should be quiet. I do believe, though, that, that's part of why people get, no, this is the version, and that is the version. No, because it's their personal journey. Yeah. And one of the things I love about this book is it's your journey and your opinions.
Right, and people have a problem with that. One of the reviewers was like, this isn't an objective analysis. I said, what the fuck is an objective analysis?
It's a very objective.
I don't know. And somebody else, it was like, I really love this book until he stopped being negative. It's a bad book. It's like, yeah, I mean, what are you going to do? I like the idea of someone interacting with it and arguing with me, because I do that with books. I mean, I can read a biographer, and I was talking to somebody, this woman I'm reading right now, and I said, well, I wouldn't, but I love her voice, I love her take on it, I love her fearlessness, and it's okay. I don't want to be the kind of person that I have to agree with everything somebody says. It seems like a really empty existence. And Canadians are especially bad at that. We're really good at doing what we're told, And I think that's a really bad habit, a really bad thing. And I think that a lot of fun can come out of, not debate, but just, And people have emailed me and said, I was listening to a couple shows. I was listening to Europe 72 while I was reading those. And I was saying, and they're doing their own thing. They're off on their own thing. Guy said he bought a copy, and he bought a copy for his brother, who's a deadhead. And they had like a great conversation. And I thought, man, that is like success, really. Like they were like hanging out and talking about it and taking it in their own place.
Yeah. Well, one thing I noticed, and I don't know how you did this, and I read it over and over. There's a couple of chapters on the Dead playing at Nassau Coliseum in Long Island in '73. I was 2. I wasn't there. 81.
But you were there in 90.
I was not there in 81. I was only 10. But I was there for 3 shows in 91. And there was something about seeing them play in that hockey arena that seemed very dark to me. It was like almost, was anybody at those shows? Did anyone go to Nassau?
91.
91?
Yeah. Well, I told you this. What writers do is they hear stories, and eventually when they tell them and perfect them, they claim them for their own. So what I've been doing is telling a story you told me. It's almost mine now.
Right.
But he told me that I said, wow, you saw him 3 nights in a row. Oh, it's amazing. And he said, yeah. And he said, there was a point being a guitar player, he's trying to get close, look at Jerry's hands or whatever. And he said, Jerry was having the glasses slip down into his nose. And he said, he was at the edge of the stage. He was probably like me, probably couldn't say anything. And Chris said, he looked like he was saying to us, why are you here? Like, why are we here? Like, what are we doing on a Tuesday night in a fucking hockey rink, playing songs that I'm tired of playing, And that could be projection, but the biographical background does kind of fit in with it, And that's why I took no glee in those final shows saying my take. It wasn't like, oh, I'm gonna get even with the dead, It was very important that I find it very, painful to see Jerry bumping his nose into the microphone because he, or the band sounding just like a rock band on another night on the tour. That's not what I got in the Dead for. It's the possibility of transcendence.
Right.
Which doesn't happen every show, it doesn't happen all the time. But when it does, I don't get that from any popular music, maybe from jazz, but not for the most part. And that's the thing that, to me, was stultified by the years.
Yeah, well, because my first show was Buffalo 90 with Brent. Anybody at that show?
There you go.
My final show was Buffalo 93. We'll talk about that another day. And
that's the next book. Yeah.
So, just one thing that at the time in 1990, the thing that was wonderful, although it was a different era, was there did seem to be a continuity in both the community and how they had evolved as a band, right? CSN opened for that show. And Stills went up to the mic and said, everybody in the parking lot, we're starting now, get in here. And I just thought, fuck you. Just like, let them come in when they want, you know.
That's not a dead.
And then the next thing you know, they're up there playing, and I'd never seen anything like it. First of all, my roommate, who was, you know, probably was trading tapes with David Lemieux.
Yeah.
Like, they hit hell in a bucket, and all of a sudden he was a whirling dervish in a way I'd never seen, and I'd known the guy for like 10
I am not
years.
a dancer until, you know.
Yeah, that's right.
And
I'm
tonight-
looking forward to seeing you
yeah,
dance
well,
tonight.
I'm not quite Bill Walton, but, you know, I try to do it. Yeah, and it's really cool. Well, that's one of the things, when you talked about the community part, when I wrote the first draft, Dan said to me, you know, the music's all good, whatever, but this stuff that you've talked to me about, the community, it's not in there. Okay, you know, you're right. And just very fortuitously, I hadn't seen my friend Jason Snyder in
Who's here
probably
tonight.
3-4 years. Yeah, the music writer Jason Snyder. 3-4 years, COVID, blah blah. And so he said, "Yeah, what's going on?" I told him about the book, and he said, "Oh, I saw The Dead about 12 times." "Oh, really? Tell me about it." And I actually used his experiences in the book to sort of say, "Yeah," and I had to acknowledge that, and it's an important part. But as you say, it's not what I'm talking about.
No.
There are great books on that. You know, the guy who blurbed this, he wrote a book on being a teenage deadhead and traveling. Great book. My story is like everybody's gone and dead. We got headphones on, and you think, how does the keyboard sound changing affect the overall, like that kind of thing, you know? Because I mean, ultimately, it's about the music. It's not the bobbleheads or the tie dye or you know, in '84, I met my best friend. All great stories, but yeah, nothing to do with this kind of thing. Yeah.
I'd like to conclude this part of the discussion with a little quote from Jerry.
Oh, please, yeah. Yeah, do we have time to take any questions, Dan? Like 5 minutes? Okay. Do this and watch the questions.
And this is fun.
It's a great question. Yeah, Dan. It's working.
That's right. Okay, this is a quote from Jerry Garcia in '93. I have a component in my personality which is not exactly self-destructive, but it's certainly ornery. There's a part of me that has a bad attitude. It's like, fuck you, you know? Try and get healthy. Fuck you, man. And I mean, part of this whole process has been coming to terms with my bad attitude self, trying to figure out what does this part of me want. I don't know where it comes from. I've always clung to it, see, because I felt it's part of what makes me me, being anarchic. Having that anarchist streak serves me on other levels, artistically certainly. But I don't want to eliminate that part of my personality. But I can also see on some levels, it's working against me. They're gifts. Some of these aspects of your personality, they're helpful and useful and powerful, but they also have this other side. They're indiscriminate. They don't make judgments.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying, that one of these books I'm reading, like, you can't say, oh, well, Jerry shouldn't have done drugs. It's bad. Like, he's talking there about real elemental stuff. Like, basically, if I take my medication, I won't be sad, but I won't be creative. That kind of basic thing. And so he struggled with that, right? And I think that's really important. It's why we need art to talk about this stuff, because it isn't a simple matter of, you know, I'm so tired of people, you know, they publish their book, well, I beat drugs and alcohol, and I married a woman 30 years my junior, and now I'm happy, here's my book. It's like, you know, the music wouldn't have existed without the drugs, asshole. You know, if you didn't have the drugs, there wouldn't have been music. But you don't want to kill yourself or have a shitty life because of it. So it's complex, it's tension, and certainly my book doesn't go into that, but really it does a different thing. And once again, that dichotomy, community and music, yeah, I can imagine, like in the 80s, it must have been just revelatory to have that experience to go and not just, because they weren't quite yet a big rock band yet, right? They were still funky and still, yeah.
Well, in some ways, they never were, you know.
Yeah, but when you're playing football stadiums, it's not the same thing.
No, it's not. But they were still taking 5 minutes between songs.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But the epigraph before the shows is a quote from Weir 21370 when he says, "This ain't a show, it's a party." And I thought, yeah, that really is the essence of the Dead experience when it's good. And why it's so cool to see a band in a room like this. When I saw Goosecat, whatever it was, a couple of years ago, and said, if I ever do this thing, I'd love to have them because they jam. And the venue just seems, the size of the crowd seems great. You know, 200-300 people. It's small enough to feel like you're actually part of the thing. Like it actually, the band's feeding off you as much as otherwise. You can talk about that at a hockey rink or football stadium, but you're not. You're big rock stars up here, people are down here, and you come to be entertained, which is fine. And I've always said the Dead were entertaining, but they weren't entertainers. And I think that's, you know, part of why Garcia, I think, was a bit jaundiced about the whole thing later on. He felt that it was becoming more like, okay, the Dead are in town, the party's in town, you know?
Yes.
Which is fun, but... Okay.
Hey, my name's Mike. I never saw Jerry, but I am seeing Bobby next weekend.
Hey! Give him our best. Give him our best.
My question, Ray, is you in your book and now you talk about the sort of the twilight years of the band and the darkness that creeps in and how that makes you feel. I wondered if in your own creative process, do you find that any of that like darkness comes in? You're an established writer. You've been at it a while. You're doing good work. How does that? Do you find that darkness creeps in, and if so, how do you deal with that in your own creative process and turning the crank and keeping the work going and keeping it fresh?
But probably no different than anybody else who, is cognizant and sees the world. You have to be, share that kind of, what do you want to call it? But I think it's the same thing. Ultimately, it's not a great act of heroism or will. It's just that it's one of those things that I can do that the world makes sense for 2 or 3 hours a day. When I leave the studio, and I'm sure Christmas is a musician, the world just doesn't really make much sense to me. I'm always bumping into things and dropping things and getting the wrong name and just, and it's a nice place to be, but it's not the best place to be. The best place to be is when you're, and that's the appeal of drugs. I mean, the right drugs, psychedelics, you get rid of the ego. You don't think, do I look bad dancing? You're with the bass player, you're not, and I think that's, so I think anybody, for me, writing is just one of the things that gives my life meaning. And if I don't do it, I'm not happy, and the problem is you can't write all the time, right? You have to have the feel less alive fallow, so that's the hard part. And that's why a lot of writers say that you get in trouble, not when you're working, but when you're not working, because it's like you're used to this. No matter what happens today, at the end of the day, I'm going to feel good about moving stuff around. I'm looking forward to doing this edit with Dan, this next book, and I'm looking forward to cutting and moving, and I don't have that in my daily life. I don't have, I don't have kids, so I don't have that sense of like accomplishment. So to me, it's just. I guess to write 15 books in a world where people don't read, you have to have a certain obsession, because the world certainly isn't pounding on your door. So we need more Bob Dylan books. Yeah. But I just feel it's as long as someone's foolish enough to print them, I'll keep doing them. Peaks and valleys, peaks and valleys.
That line about not writing and needing to write, that's what Jerry would say about not playing and needing to play.
Right.
So cheers to you.
Right. Yeah. And they said, why do you play so much? How come you come home from a Dead tour? You're complaining that we're doing all these tours, and then we open the newspaper and you're playing 2 nights later with your solo band. He's like, I can smoke cigarettes, drink coffee, what else am I? And I get that. And there's a downside to that, right? Right? You're not really a full person. You pay for everything, right? Every Saturday night is a Sunday morning, and so there's gonna be a price to pay. But for me, it's the most fun you can have. Better than drugs, better than alcohol, better than anything, because it makes sense for a few hours a day. The world makes sense because you made that paragraph work. It's false. It's an illusion, but what is it? Right? As Hunter said, it's all just a dream, right? Yeah.
We dreamed long ago.
Well, we can certainly continue the chat. Next to see it. There literally is like can you see it out there? You can see it. Okay, great. It's just me, maybe. Okay.
Yeah, there's a definite dry ice.
Last thoughts? Any last stuff? We can certainly hang around.